I would need to take that information and talk with my staff at DGS and executives to figure out what would be the best way to approach that.
Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Little, as a follow-up, you mentioned the fiscal and you're trying to collect some of this information, and you collect the information, the data, albeit voluntarily, but it's after the award has been made. So is that early in the contracting process, or is it more at the end?
The one I'm speaking with, well, right now with fiscal being designed, it's going to capture the information as it is at the end of the contract. But what I was speaking of was that I am planning to look at trying to capture that information on the front end, and that's what we're looking at and exploring. That would, if it's vetted, would it be effective in July of 2017?
2017. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what information then are you
It
going
would
to be
be
capturing?
voluntary as well. It would be
Right.
the same information that meets the statute that we're collecting that data on now.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. So now let's move on to, thank you very much, our second panel, which is the impact of Prop 209 on California's minorities, women's, and small business owners. Fred Jordan, who's the president of the African American Chamber of Commerce, Tim Lawrence of Tim Lawrence Consulting, and a former director of the Inclusive Business Initiative, Insight Center for the Community Economic Development, Michael Chan, president of Asian Inc., and Ruth Bly, president of and CEO of Blyco Incorporated. Great, and we'll start with Mr. Jordan. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. It's my tape on. Honorable members, I'm just so pleased to be here and to talk about the repeal of Proposition 209, or the impacts of Proposition 209. And part of my pleasure is I have my leader up here, David Chu. I'm from San Francisco, president of San Francisco African American Chamber of Commerce. And Proposition 209 is something I could talk about for a long time. And they told me I had 5 minutes to talk and to write out my talk. And I suspect that they know that I could talk about this for a long time. I'm sort of reminded of Abraham Lincoln. He said that if he had to write a 5-minute speech, it would take him about 3 or 4 days. But if he had to write a 20-minute speech, it would take him 4 or 5 hours. But if he was given an hour or more, he could start now. So I think I could really start now.
So we should start the clock now, then. Please.
My name is Fred Jordan, and I'm going to read this to a great extent. I'm president of F.E. Jordan Associates, Inc. We're a civil, structural, environmental engineering and construction management firm based out of San Francisco. We've been in business over 30 years. I have degrees in civil engineering from Howard and Stanford, and I'm licensed to practice engineering in 15 states. Today I'm going to talk about the impact of Proposition 209 on minorities and women. Much has been written on the impact in education and employment, but today I'm going to talk about on businesses. Prior to the passage of Proposition 209, as requested from me, my personal take, my firm did a lot of work for Caltrans and construction management in the northern part of the Bay Area and all of Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego. We designed bridges, the Cypress Bridge, 1324, and a number of structures for the state, and with a number of awards, including the most outstanding award for outstanding contractor in the state of California. Since Proposition 209, we have not been able to secure one contract. In the meantime, we have, I have had the pleasure of serving as the chair, speaking of the general population, the chair of the Caltrans State Business Council. I served there for 13 years. And prior to Proposition 209, minorities, and as Assemblyman Jud mentioned, minorities and women, or I'm sorry, as Orrin Selstrom mentioned, minorities and women were doing up as high as 30% of the work. And just before Proposition 209, in 1997, minorities and women for Caltrans did about 16%, and things were improving. And then, as the impact of Proposition 209 came on, the negative impacts were dramatic, they were quick, and they were decisive. And notwithstanding the fact that only one African American was admitted to the University of California Law School, the impacts weighed most heavily on African American businesses and remain so today. Within 2 years after implementation of Proposition 209, a Berkeley report cited that 80% of black contractors in the state of California went out of business. 80%. And Caltrans today has not retained a single African American consultant, even though 600 are registered, for 17 years. That's since Proposition 209. Now that just gives you some idea of what the impacts are. The expectations would be the same for the Department of General Services. And the big item here is that records are not allowed to be kept. The state agencies don't have to keep records. And they don't need, the feeling now is that they don't need to do anything about diversity and inclusion, even though public monies are involved, because they are now protected by law. After implementation of Proposition 209, 1/3 of Caltrans certified minority and women-owned businesses went out of business. They went out of business. And also, only 1/3 remained in business. And immediately after Proposition 209, minority firms experienced a 50% decline or decrease in contract awards. And for women, it was 40%. In 2009, Caltrans reported minority and women had total of 3.8%. That's a big drop from 16%. 3.8%. And for African Americans, it was 0.19. That's 0.2%, 0.2 of 1%. That's less than 1%, less than 1/2 of 1%. Caltrans did report a total of, did report these totals, and there have been substantial increases, and they're what I call spiked increases. And as the Business Council began to advocate, the numbers have improved. But again, if you bring the state in, where you have no reporting, these numbers would be in half. And so you can imagine in 2009 that you take 1/2 of 3.8%. And that's how dire things are. So in the preliminary discoveries where we were dealing with, looking at a lawsuit for egregious discrimination because it's so bad, we found that very few of the agencies actually report. Only Caltrans and DGS report. So California, with its 55% minority population, has undergone a complete culture change, erasing all gains of affirmative action and equal opportunity as a direct result of Proposition 209. So I want to thank you. I did get the sign that my time was up. However, I wrote a book called The Lynching of the American Dream, having to do with Proposition 209. So I will leave that copy for everyone, and then hopefully I still will get my hour. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, hold on. We'll go through the panel, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we will be taking your wisdom in a little bit more measure later on. Mr. Lawrence, your report was already referred to, so thank you for your work.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Honorable ladies and gentlemen of the Judiciary Committee, esteemed staff, colleagues, and members of the public, my name is Tim Lorenz, the former director of the Inclusive Business Initiative in Oakland, and I'm here to report to you as the lead author of the report on the loss of contract dollars to minority and women business enterprises, or MWBEs, as a result of Proposition 209. Co-author Michael Sumner and I were asked to look at state and local government procurement with MWBEs before and after Proposition 209. Some jurisdictions, like the City of Los Angeles, had race-neutral programs already and were not changed by Prop 209. Jurisdictions with data before Prop 209 or where a reliable estimate could be made include San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and the state of California. Before Prop 209, all state agencies participated in the MWBE program, including the Cal State system. The MWBE program was probably one of the most robust programs of any state during the early to mid-1990s, reaching 26.2% of all state discretionary spending in the 1994-95 fiscal year. This amounted to $520 million at that time, or $823 million in today's dollars. From the historic reports, it appears that the Department of General Services ran a very good MWBE program, as well as its Small Business Enterprise, or SBE, program. In total, MWBE firms from the state and the cities lost between $1 and $1.1 billion in public contracts in today's dollars as a result of Prop 209. There's no way to know how many public contracts or subcontracts were retained by MWBEs after Prop 209, or how many new contracts or subcontracts were gained. The greatest difficulty in doing the study was the lack of data after MWBE programs ended as a result of Prop 209. San Francisco and Oakland today collect data on contracts with certified MWBE firms, but there is a gap in many years where there was no reliable data. The state now collects data on a voluntary basis as part of its SBE program, but with no certification requirement, the data is not comparable. Based on this study and my MWBE policy experience, I would like to make the following recommendations. One, that the state look at the state of Washington's race and gender-neutral supplier diversity program. Like California, Washington had a Prop 209 called Initiative 200. I have studied Washington's program. I have led a delegation of California cities to investigate the program there, and Washington has been able to have a successful policy by having a commitment from the last three governors, the state legislature, and department directors to eliminate discrimination in all contract processes. And you have to really think about that. How do you end discrimination in all pieces of the contract process? And they've really taken it apart and tried to end the discrimination. And the governor holds department heads accountable for their supplier diversity outcomes. They will actually have meetings at the cabinet level where the governor will ask department heads, how are you doing on your supplier diversity? And that's something we can imagine could happen one day here in California. Secondly, I recommend a trip by lawmakers, the governor's office, and the DGS to Washington State to meet with counterparts about their supplier diversity program. 3, I recommend, in addition, that there are a number of race and gender neutral enhancements that could be done to the existing program here by the state. 1, accepting certifications from the Asian Inc., the Minority Supplier Development Councils, the SBA, the UCP DBE certification, as well as cities, in order to collect certified MWBE data. California could do what Florida does and have 2 different types of data, one for certified firms, and it would report out the level of spend with certified firms, and then would have a second column, level of spend with non-certified MWBE firms. In other words, people who voluntarily say they have they are minority or a women business enterprise. And that way, the public would have two different pieces of data, one that you can really rely on and one that may be true, but you're not quite sure. Second, setting voluntary MWBE subcontracting goals embedded in overall SBE subcontracting goals. In other words, the SBE subcontracting is mandatory, that 25% or whatever it is on a per project basis. Within that, you tell the contractor your voluntary MBE goal is 8% or whatever it is, and the WBE goal and so on. And in Washington State, just by setting that voluntary goal, the levels of subcontracting with MWBEs has risen by about 20%. So specific outreach to all SBE communities, including MWBE communities. As Oren said, as long as outreach is done to all communities, you can do specific outreach to MWBE communities. And SBE set-aside program where small businesses only can bid on certain projects. Department of General Services was very helpful as I did this research with many historical reports. This gives me hope for the state as a partner on these issues. I would love to work with you in the state on this topic. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chang.
Thank you. Good morning to committee members, staff, certainly the guests here. It's certainly my pleasure to really present, say, from an anecdotal viewpoint, really what Asian Inc. as a nonprofit has seen over the years. My name is Michael Chan. I'm president of Asian Incorporated. We operate 3 minority business development agency business centers funded through the Department of Commerce in San Francisco, San Jose, and Fresno. So this gives us a fair context vis-a-vis the various industries, such as in agriculture, high-tech, biotech, construction, and in other areas. I myself have been involved in the selection of general contractors in regards to the construction of housing projects and commercial projects. So I've gone through competitive bid processes as well as design build processes and all. Most definitely I would say that, and my experience spans about 25 years in that regards. And certainly if we looked at contracting pre-Proposition 209, there was definitely a sense of within the stakeholders that the preference programs, certainly you had to be in compliance, because if you're not in compliance or so, there were penalties. There were things that could be done to ensure that down the road parties would not be, if they were not in compliance, be blackballed essentially, or not permitted to compete and all. So there was that climate of wanting to make things work and so forth. And that was good. That was very good, because many firms who were starting off had to have initial access, had to be able to then get their feet wet and move up that ladder of capabilities to provide contracts. These same firms that I saw that were competing successfully and all, many have downsized. Many have definitely downsized or have moved into other markets and all. So really when Prop 209 happened, it created just a total climate, the whole climate of compliance just totally changed, just outright. What we then saw was that if we, through the centers, if we certainly question, well, why can't we have some aspirational goals? Why can't we have other types of goals? The common excuse they would always run into was, well, we can't do that because of Prop 209. That. So there's no further discussion. We will not be in violation of Prop 209. That was a constant, repetitive excuse that we heard throughout the various counties of California. And in fact, our clientele, MBEs, we have MBE clients in 29 California counties. That's half. That's half of California's counties. So we did see these trends emerge, and most certainly they really were accelerated during the Great Recession, very much so. And we really saw how the Old Boys Network was reinstated. or that things reverted back. There was an absolute refusal to unbundle contracts. If you refuse to unbundle contracts, you in essence are preventing access. Under prior to Prop 209, unbundling was common because that would give the opportunity for MBEs to advance, to grow their capabilities. Here, the argument was, well, we're not going to unbundle because we need to save money because of the economies of scale and all. But yet you run into various contractors, contracting agencies like the San Francisco Airport, where they would unbundle their drywall contracts. They would hire 3 drywall contractors to do a terminal. Each would do, say, 1 floor. And they did bring everything within the budget on that. So that argument about saying that it would cost more and so forth, it was really leading to a point also that these contractors during the Great Recession would lowball. They would lowball to bank contracts. Their whole idea here was that in their selection of the subs, they would be subs that they were familiar with because they did a good faith effort. They did a good faith effort in selecting subs, say, for various projects, say, in the Bay Area. They would bring in their subs from Las Vegas. They would bring them in from Sacramento and all. And in doing so, in selecting them, they would say, we know you. The game here was that we want to maintain our overhead and profit because of the overhead and profit issue. I'll go straight into one particular example. We had, say, City College of San Francisco's Chinatown campus, a $128 million project. Less than 5% went to Asian American contractors. This was in the Chinatown project. How did that happen? Well, you had a said developer, Bovis. They said, all right, we know Asian Inc. is going to have a contract to monitor. So what we're going to do is we're going to get all of our subs pre-qualified, signed up. And they did that. They did that literally like the day before our contract was approved by City College. And then they said, well, everything is set now. You can't unwind this because it will create all types of legal issues and all. So we were forced and compelled to really deal with a stacked hand already on that. So in really closing, I would say too, right now the environment is also very abusive. If there is going to be a minority contractor that does make its way through and does rock the boat and all, many times in terms of compliance, all of a sudden there's disputes regarding change orders. All of a sudden there's disputes regarding the work specifications. And then there is no prompt payment. In essence, they're being made an example. They're being made an example so that they will not rise or compete again within that system at all. So those are the things I'd like to just share with the committee. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Bly.
Oh dear, it's my turn.
It's your turn.
Hello, my name is Ruth Bly, and I basically came here to tell you my story because it ties into some of the things that have been said. I founded Blyco Incorporated in 1988, and I am and always have been its president. We primarily perform electrical construction, and we specialize in projects such as bridges, tunnels, and piers. So prior to the passage of Proposition 209, Blyco benefited from the friendlier construction environment that sought to include women-owned businesses into the contracting mix. We started out with the small jobs, discrete items that could be separated from larger electrical subcontracts, standalone items such as the lighting in Castro Valley BART platform, lots of temporary signal systems. I guess I need to breathe. Temporary power on large projects and many other smaller contracts. We chose to focus on more difficult projects in the mid-90s landed projects such as the San Francisco Airport elevated roadways, the 101-280 interchange upgrade. The prime contractors in those days were inspired to work with us as we continued to stretch our capacity and increase our technical ability. And let me be clear about this. The inspiration was as a result of the DBE goals. We continued to target bridges, Park Street Bridge, High Street Bridge, 4th Street Bridge. They were all bridges that we were the low bidder on. And we also bid and landed numerous small tunnel lighting projects. My company has evolved into a company that was the low bidder and successful subcontractor on the Bay Bridge SAS structure and the Devil Slide Tunnel on Highway 1. Now, both those projects did have federal dollars, so there was still a DBE requirement. I'm testifying here today on behalf of Women Construction Owners and Executives USA, which is a national trade association representing women business owners and policy-making executives in the construction industry. In California, there are over 12,000 women-owned construction companies. A majority of our members perform public works projects and so have been negatively impacted by Proposition 209. I want to emphasize that WCOE does not believe in quotas. The bidding process must be exactly that, a process that identifies a competent contractor with the lowest price able to construct the project. The public works arena is full of super large construction companies, as this is the only way to bid, bond, and construct public works projects that are now in the billions of dollars. Which leads me to the other problem in California, that the definition of a small construction business is difficult. Under the U.S. business standards, a small business is considered eligible for an outreach program if its annual sales average $27 million or less per year. Under the state DGS standards for state outreach, the average gross income could not exceed $8 million, and this applies to all contractors, whether you are a painter or electrical contractor. If you're an electrical contractor, $8 million is not very much when over 50% of your costs are materials, and they're very expensive materials. Therefore, even though I only employ 35 full-time people, I'm not considered a small business by DGS standards. The problem this creates is that small businesses, by DGS standards, are so small there is hardly a portion of work small enough or discrete enough for them to bid on and perform on these public works projects. If you had asked me 25 years ago what I would have anticipated the construction industry to be like in the future, I would have told you that I would expect to be working with a lot more DBE firms. Unfortunately, this is not the case, and it's my experience that there are now fewer women-owned firms out there. The inspiration for large primes to think outside of the box is gone, and DBEs and small businesses have suffered. I'm not blaming the large contractors. Their focus is the project, and construction is a risky business. No one would logically add additional risk to a project for no reason. Before Proposition 209, there was a reason. The government recognized that small and DBE businesses are the backbone of communities, and therefore created incentives that allowed entrepreneurial people to get a foothold in an industry that is very close-knit and very complicated. The reason no longer exists, and the whole state is impacted by the loss of income to small and DBE businesses. WCOE believes, but I think there is a problem with this belief, that we could quantify the impact of Proposition 209 if we had a study that compared the woman and minority participation on the federally funded projects in California versus the state-funded projects. But I think we have a problem with identifying those. But the federally funded projects definitely have a higher level of participation. Affirmative action is not about granting a privilege or a benefit to an individual or group just because their gender or minority status. Rather, affirmative action only creates an opportunity to compete for a job or position. One still needs to fulfill the requirements of the offer. WCOE Executives USA, and I thank you for this opportunity to testify.
All right, thank you. So given, and the background materials that we have for this hearing does show a significant decrease in women-owned businesses, how have you survived?
Well, those two big jobs, they had the federal dollars.
Right.
And they spanned, the Bay Bridge job spanned, is it 10 years now? And Devil Slide was pretty long, too. So, and also, like I said, we targeted bridges. So we're actually really, really good at it. So I'm low bidder. Even if I wasn't a woman-owned business, I would still get those projects.
Okay, so you've grown and you've learned, but if I take your testimony right, under the opportunities pre-209, or certainly under the federal rules because of federal dollars, that opened the door for you to get to the position that you're in? Is that a fair
Right.
statement?
I needed the contractors to think outside the box a little bit and get contracts at the time that were size appropriate to me. And as my company grew, then I could take the bigger contracts. But if I was just a small electrical company today, I couldn't go out and compete on any of these projects because they're way too big. And nobody's going to carve off a little slice for me because they're like, no, I'm going to give that to Steiny or Rosendin because they'll do the whole project. It's like, okay, I'll go away. You know.